Now, the greatest radio shows of all time.
Suspense.
The Shadow Node.
Washington calling David Harding, counter-spy.
Classic radio theater.
The Great Gildersleeve.
Fibber McGee and Molly.
Dragnet. Gunsmoke.
The Lone Ranger.
Now, step back into our time machine with your host, Wyatt Cox.
Good evening, friends of the Inner Sanctum.
Crime drama Bennett Kilpack, starring as Mr. Keene, tracer of lost persons, going back 72 years to February 9th, 1950, in the case of murder and the jewel thief. And we thank you for tuning in on this Wednesday, Hump Day. This is the 9th day of February, the 40th day of 2022, 326 days remaining till we get to 2023. Well, after no presidential candidate received a majority of electoral votes in the 1824 election, the House of Representatives elected John Quincy Adams, President of the United States, in 1825 on this date. U.S. Weather Bureau established on this date in 1870, now the National Weather Service. U.S. Department of Agriculture established as a cabinet-level agency on this date in 1889. William G. Morgan invented volleyball in 1895. And top U.S. military strategists held their first formal meeting on this date in 1942 to discuss war strategy in World War II. Daylight saving time went into effect in the U.S. on this date in 1942. It would be called wartime because it would stay into effect until the conclusion of the war. Allied authorities declared Guadalcanal secure on this date in 1943 after Imperial Japanese evacuated its remaining forces from the island, ending the Battle of Guadalcanal. Senator Joseph McCarthy accused the State Department of being filled with communists on this date in 1950.
The State Department. Now, I want to tell the Secretary of State this. If he wants to call me tonight at the Utah Hotel, I'll be glad to give him the names of those 57 card-carrying communists. Now, I don't claim to be any FBI or anything, so that when I have the names of 57, you can be right well sure there are a lot more.
Senator McCarthy, on this date in 1950. Joanna Woodward received the first star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on this date in 1960. Beatles making their second appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show on this date in 1964, performing before a record-busting audience of 73 million. First combat troops sent to South Vietnam on this date in 1965. The first test of the Boeing 747 on this date in 1969. And the 6.4 Silmar earthquake hit the San Fernando Valley area of California in 1971.
It's a mess. It's a real mess. I can't believe it. I'm looking at all of these structures as badly damaged as they are. The bridges are just broken and down. It's very bumpy here. If I sound a little broken up, it's because I'm bouncing up and down like a yo-yo.
Traffic reporter talking about the earthquake on this date in 1971 in the San Fernando Valley. Satchel Paige becoming the first Negro League player to become voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1971. On that same date, Apollo 14 returned to Earth after the third manned moon landing. Comet Halley's comet, reaching perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, during its second visit to the solar system in the 20th century back in 1986. In 2001, the American submarine USS Greenville accidentally struck and sunk the Ehimaru, a Japanese training vessel operated by a fishery high school. Passing away on this date in history, Eddie Duchin, Sophie Tucker, Gabby Hayes, Percy Faith, Bill Haley of Bill Haley and the Comets, Tyrone Davis, the man who co-founded NFL Films, Ed Sable, and jazzman Chick Corea. Oh, man, Chick Corea. Music Magic, I remember that well. I played a lot of his stuff on the radio back in the day. Yes, I'm old enough to have really been a disc jockey who actually jockeyed discs. Really, I did. This is the birth date of the 9th President of the United States, William Henry Harrison, the first to die in office after 31 days, and the last born before the Declaration of Independence was written. Ronald Coleman was born on this date in history. You've heard him on the Halls of Ivy. Ironically, he died fairly young. He died in 1958, born in 1891. So not long after the Halls of Ivy was aired. Brian Donlevy, Dangerous Assignment, born on this date in history. Brazilian actress Carmen Miranda, dancer Gypsy Rose Lee, singer Ernest Tubb, country singer, also actress Katherine Grayson, journalist Roger Mudd, who passed away last year at the age of 93, and evangelist Garner Ted Armstrong, all born on this date in history. The man who put the bump in the bump, de bump, de bump, Barry Mann, songwriter with his wife Cynthia Weil, is 83 today. Carole King, it is not too late. Carole is 80 years old. Also singer-songwriter Barbara Lewis, Hello Stranger. Actor Joe Pesci is 79, as is Barbara Lewis. Actress Mia Farrow, 76 today. Remember her through all of her stuff. She's, I believe she's still married to Woody Allen, but I remember so much of the stuff she did. Also from Who's the Boss and SVU, Judith Light, 73. Jim J. Bullock, 67. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Holly Johnson, he is 62 today. Country singer Travis Tritt, 59. From It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Charlie Day, 46. He was he was Loki in the Thor movies and the Avengers. Tom Hiddleston, 41. From The Wire and Friday Night Lights, Michael B. Jordan is 35. She did Hit Me Up in the movie Happy Feet. Gia Farrell is 33, and actress Kelly Berglund is 26. Those just a few of the people who celebrate the 9th day of February as their birthday, and if this happens to be your birthday...
Hi, we're the Four Freshmen, and we just want to say... Happy birthday to you!
And on this Wednesday, we go back 72 years to February 9th, 1950. Bennett Kilpack stars as Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons. That's next on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite station.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or if, like a lot of people, you just have a plan you're not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare. It's a Christian healthcare sharing program. There are more than 400,000 members now, and they love it. In fact, MediShare has double the customer satisfaction rate compared to that of health insurance. And MediShare really is the gold standard when it comes to healthcare sharing. It's been around more than 25 years. Members have shared more than $4 billion of each other's medical bills. Plus, MediShare is for you. It has saved its members billions by advocating on their behalf. Best of all, the typical savings for a family is around $6,000 a year. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. MediShare has a 98% customer satisfaction rating, and you are invited to be part of it. Call now. 833-34-BIBLE. That's 833-34-BIBLE. 833-34-BIBLE.
I'm Wyatt Cox. Thanks for tuning in today. Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons ran from 1937 to 1955, produced by Frank and Ann Hummert, based it on Robert W. Chambers' 1906 novel, The Tracer of Lost Persons. Now, it aired on the NBC Blue Network until 1947, so that's 10 years. Then it switched to CBS from 1947 to 1955. Interestingly enough, for a show that did over 1,690 broadcasts, only 59 of the shows remain in circulation and remain at all. So I'm just always glad when we're able to find one that is of a quality enough to air. Bennett Kilpack ran in 1937 until very late in the run, Phil Clark taking over the role late in the run. Now, what we're going to do right now is take you back to February 9th, 1950, Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons, right here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox.
It's time now for Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons. Ladies and gentlemen, Anison and Colinos present Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons, one of the most famous characters of American fiction in one of radio's most thrilling dramas. Tonight and every Thursday at the same time, the famous old investigator takes from his file and brings to us one of his most celebrated missing persons cases. Tonight's case is entitled The Case of Murder and the Jewel Thief. Mr. Keene and the Case of Murder and the Jewel Thief. Our scene opens in the office which Mr. Keene, the great investigator, shares with his friend and partner, Mike Clancy. The telephone is ringing, and as Mike reaches for the receiver, he is unaware that he's about to raise the curtain on a startling drama.
Mr. Keene's office.
Is this Mr. Keene?
No, this is his partner, Mike Clancy speaking.
May I talk to Mr. Keene? It's very important.
Well, who's calling, please?
Tell him it's Mr. Karl Rollins.
Well, just a second. Mr. Keene?
Yes, Mike?
There's a fellow named Karl Rollins who wants a word with you. He says it's important.
Karl Rollins? All right, Mike, I'll take it. Hello?
Mr. Keene?
Yes?
This is Karl Rollins. I've got to see you right away.
In regard to what, Mr. Rollins?
Well, I can't talk about it now over the phone, but if it means anything to you, I'm also known as Kansas Karl.
Kansas Karl?
Sans preserve us, Mr. Keene. But isn't Kansas Karl the jewel thief the cops have been after for months?
Just a moment, Mike. Hello, Mr. Rollins.
Yes, Mr. Keene.
Where are you calling from?
My room's on 10th Street, number 892, apartment 4D.
All right. You'll wait there for me?
Yes, What?
Mr. Rollins. Hello? Hello?
What happened, boss?
Sure, I heard revolver shots, Mike. We've got to get over to Rollins' apartment right away.
This must be the flat, Mr. Keene. There's the name over the doorbell. Rollins.
I don't think there's any point in ringing, Mike. If the door isn't open, we'll have to break it down.
It's open, boss.
Well, let's go in and keep your gun handy, Mike.
Right, boss. The room is empty, Mr. Keene.
So it seems, Mike.
You want me to go down and see if I can find the landlady or the superintendent?
Just a minute, Mike. Do you smell anything?
Sure. I smell powder.
A gun was discharged in this room a little while ago. There's no doubt. Those were pistol shots I heard over the telephone.
Yeah, but nothing's disturbed, boss. The place seems empty.
Mike, look at the floor.
What? There's blood running along the crack in the wood there.
It's coming from under that couch. Quickly, Mike. Pull the couch away from the wall.
Yes. Oh. Sans preserve us. There he is. It must be Karl Rollins.
With 2 bullets in his head. He's dead, Mike.
I'll see if I can find an identification on him. Hey, he's got a wallet in his pocket, Mr. Keene, and a little notebook with some addresses in it.
Well, let me have the wallet, Mike. It identifies him as Karl Rollins, the man who phoned our office. He was shot down before he could say why he got in touch with me.
Well, it beats me, Mr. Keene. This fellow was wanted in half the states in the country for jewel robberies.
Yes, Kansas Karl was known as the society jewel thief. Well educated, with impeccable manners, he'd impress rich people and then rob them.
But why should he get in touch with you, Mr. Keene? Sure, he'd have known you'd turn him into the police at the drop of a hat.
Exactly. Maybe that's just why.
There's someone at the door, boss.
Before you answer it, Mike, pull that couch back and hide the body once more. I'll put a chair over the bloodstain on the floor.
Okay, sir. There.
All right, Mike. Now you can open the door.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I must have the wrong apartment.
Just a moment, madam. Whom did you want to see?
Oh, Mr. Rollins.
You have the right place. Please come in. Let me introduce myself. My name is Keene, and this is my partner, Mr. Clancy.
Mr. Keene, the famous investigator?
And who are you, may I ask?
Mrs. Andrea Mitchell. I'm a good friend of Mr. Rollins. But why are you here? Has something happened to Karl?
I'll explain in just a moment. First, I'd like you to tell me, how long have you known Karl Rollins?
We met 6 months ago. As a matter of fact, we're engaged to be married. I'm a widow, Mr. Keene.
And what business was Mr. Rollins in, Mrs. Mitchell?
He's a jewel importer.
Oh, I'll say he was.
I beg your pardon?
All right, Mike, we shouldn't wait any longer. You better notify the police.
The police? Mr. Keene, what's happened to Karl? Please tell me.
Karl Rollins has been murdered, Mrs. Mitchell.
Murdered? Oh no. No, he could. Oh.
She's fainted, Mr. Keene.
I'll take care of her, Mike. You call the police and report the murder of Karl Rollins, alias Kansas Karl. Are you feeling stronger, Mrs. Mitchell?
Mr. Keene, you said that Karl...
We found his body in his apartment here just a few minutes before you came in.
Well, Lieutenant Hale of the homicide squad said he'll be down right away, boss.
All right, Mike.
Where is Karl's body, Mr. Keene?
Perhaps you better not see him, Mrs. Mitchell. Remain where you are in that chair until you feel better.
Who killed him? Karl had no enemies. His life was above reproach.
Mr. Keene, either the lady never knew what was going on, or she's a pretty good actress.
Never knew what? Mr. Keene, what does Mr. Clancy mean?
Karl Rollins was a well-known jewel thief, Mrs. Mitchell. The police have been after him for months.
Oh, no. No, I don't believe it.
It happens to be true.
But Karl loved me. He was a respectable man, Mr. Keene. He couldn't...
His respectability was just a pose, Mrs. Mitchell. However, I have a feeling perhaps his life had changed sometime before he died. But I'm afraid you'll have to answer a great many questions for the authorities.
You don't think they connect me with it?
Karl Rollins' past? Perhaps they might. However, if you confide in me, Mrs. Mitchell, I may be able to help you.
There's so little I can tell you, Mr. Keene. I met Karl at a dinner dance 6 months ago, given by Mrs. Arthur Van Burton.
The wife of the banker?
Yes. I'm fairly well known in the city, Mr. Keene. My late husband was Elliot Mitchell, the art dealer. When I met Karl Rollins, he was introduced as a jewel importer. I had no idea.
He was actually a world-famous jewel thief. He was very clever about hiding his real identity.
We saw a great deal of each other for several months. And then Karl proposed to me. I accepted. And I told my daughter we were getting married in a month.
I see.
Jean, my daughter is only 17, Mr. Keene. She's at a finishing school in Vermont. I don't know what will happen when all this notoriety comes out. I'm not worried about myself. I'm only thinking of Jean.
I understand, Mrs. Mitchell.
Mr. Keene, if you could help me, I'd be very grateful. I swear I knew nothing about Karl's past.
Well, tell me, Mrs. Mitchell, did your husband leave you a great deal of money when he passed away?
Oh, no, he didn't. He left debts. Debts I had to pay off with most of his insurance.
Did Karl Rollins know about that?
Yes, I told him.
And he still wanted to go through with the wedding?
Oh, yes, Mr. Keene. To tell you the truth, I had to borrow money from him in order to send my daughter back to school.
Kansas Karl giving money away? Sure, that takes the cake, Mr. Keene.
Mike, I have a hunch that something happened to Karl Rollins' character recently. I believe he changed from being a ruthless thief to a decent citizen. That may have been the reason he got in touch with me before he was murdered.
Mr. Keene, I swear to you that there was nothing but good in Karl when he died. You've got to believe that. Because if you don't, I know you won't believe my story. And I need your help desperately for my daughter Jean's sake as well as my own.
There's just one thing more I want to ask you, Mrs. Mitchell. Did you ever meet any of Karl Rollins' friends or acquaintances?
No, Mr. Keene. But there was one woman he spoke of. A woman named Grace Bentley. She was older than Karl, I believe. And when he spoke of her, he almost sounded as if he were talking of his mother, who has been dead for many years.
What did he tell you about her, Mrs. Mitchell?
Well, just that she was a good friend and he trusted her.
Do you know where Grace Bentley can be found?
I believe she's a seamstress, Mr. Keene, and lives alone. Oh, I think Karl had her address in a small notebook he always carried with him.
Well, that must be the book we found in his pocket, boss.
Well, let me see it, Mike. Yes, Grace Bentley's name is in this book, along with her address. Well, Mrs. Mitchell, the police will be here any moment now.
Oh, what shall I tell them, Mr. Keene?
Just what you told me.
But if my name is connected with this murder, my daughter Jean will know. Her friends at school will hear of it, and she'll be ostracized.
I don't think that'll happen. I'm going to ask the police to keep this case out of the newspapers as long as possible. It may make it easier for us to solve.
What about the addresses in that notebook, boss?
The police will want to check every one of them, I'm sure, Mike. But we can help them by seeing Grace Bentley ourselves. Perhaps she can shed a little light on one of the most puzzling cases we've had in months.
The number on Miss Bentley's letterbox outside was 12, Mr. Keene.
This apartment is number 12, Mike.
Remember, one peep out of you, you'll get a bullet through your head.
Boss, did you hear that?
Yes, Mike. Listen.
And we'll get back to Mr. Keene, tracer of lost persons, from February 9th, 1950, in just a few moments. But first, we're going to have the news of the day from 72 years ago. You're listening to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. That's me. And right here on your favorite radio station, speaking of your favorite station, they have some words for you. So here's the choice. Some people say the USA is finished. It's evil, a has-been, full of hate and injustice. The U.S. Constitution should be trashed and the Bill of Rights abolished. No free speech, no gun ownership. Competition and free markets are bad. We're all too stupid. For our own good, the government must own everything and know all your secrets.
Other people say that America has created the freest, richest, happiest, most generous society that has ever existed in the world. That's why millions of people are desperate to come here and escape their brutal lives in Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, and 100 other countries.
In America, we have the right to succeed, the right to our own living, the right to have a family, the right to believe in God, the right to have our own ideas, the right to be safe and secure, and the right to be left alone.
Where do you stand? Help us save the Constitution and restore the American dream. Go to SaveMyFreedom.com.
Brought to you by the American Media Council.
Thank you for tuning in to Classic Radio Theater here on your favorite station. We're listening to an episode of Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons, as it was broadcast Thursday, February 9th, 1950. In the newspapers of that Thursday, 72 years ago, these were some of the headlines. President Truman's fact-finders pushed John L. Lewis and the soft coal operators back to the bargaining table yesterday and reported 4 hours afterwards that the conference atmosphere is not sharp. But Chairman David L. Cole added, "I don't think I can label it progress." Even that much, however, was in definite contrast to bitter recriminations which marked yesterday morning's open session in the board's investigation of the dispute that has brought a national fuel emergency. The sharp change in the U.S. government's policy toward Russia since the war was underscored yesterday with the publications of excerpts from the late President Roosevelt's news conference spanning the last 4 years of his life. Time after time, Roosevelt expressed the belief that Russia would cooperate for peace. Now that hope has waned. Yesterday, Secretary of State Dean Acheson took the stand that the only thing which will make an impression on the Soviets is power. The House wrangled a $130 billion postal increase bill to the post of passage yesterday, but a technicality blocked the final vote until today. Congressman Fulton, the Republican of Pennsylvania, charged opponents of mail rate increases had been gagged, preventing a vote by demanding a printed copy of the bill containing all amendments approved during the day's debate. This automatically put off a vote on passage until today, when such a version of the measure will be available. 5 people arrested in Detroit yesterday with $37,000 in cash in a paper bag, and police immediately began an attempt to connect them with 2 Boston holdups, one of them the $1.5 million Brinks robbery. Detective Inspector Walter Wyrod said the 5 refused to talk except that they got the money from gambling. The big CIO United Steelworkers came to the aid of striking coal miners yesterday with a $500,000 check to relieve distress. The steelworkers promised there's more to come. Well, it didn't matter much when the robber asked Mrs. George Sedmont for her money. But when the hold-up man told her to hurry up or I'll let your kid have it, things started popping in the small Newark, New Jersey laundry she and her husband operate. Mrs. Sedmont pulled her 5-year-old son to the side, picked up a heavy paper stapler and reported, "I'll let you have it in the head." Well, the man ducked and fled. And those some of the day's top news stories as reported in the newspapers of Thursday, February 9th, 1950, on your radio Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons, which continues now on Classic Radio Theater.
Now just sit there until I'm through.
Try the door, Mike. Softly.
It's locked, Mr. Keen.
Get your gun out. Can you smash the lock with one shot, Mike?
I think so, boss.
Right after you shoot, I'll push the door in. Someone's being held up at the point of a gun inside that room. We've got to take him by surprise. You ready, Mike?
Ready, boss. Mr. Keen, there's a woman tied up in that chair there.
In the bedroom. He's in the bedroom.
Well, after him, Mike. Are you Grace Bentley, madam?
Yes, please. This wire is cutting my wrist.
I'll have it off in a moment.
Oh, thank heaven you've come. Who are you, sir?
My name is Keen, Miss Bentley.
Why, the famous investigator. Oh, you don't know how glad I am to see you.
He got away, Mr. Keen. The bedroom window was open and there's a fire escape leading down to the street.
Do you know him, Miss Bentley?
Yes. His name is George Darcy. He came to my apartment a few minutes ago with a gun in his hand and tied me to this chair.
Do you know why?
I think it had something to do with a man I know. Karl Rollins.
Miss Bentley, Karl Rollins is dead.
Dead? Oh, no. Oh, then it's happened. All his hopes, his attempts to lead a new life came to nothing. I knew Karl very well, Mr. Keen.
Did you know that he was really Kansas Karl, a famous jewel thief wanted by the police?
Yes. And I might say that I was the cause of his turning over a new leaf and going straight.
Suppose you tell me the entire story, Miss Bentley. But before you start, I want to send out a police alarm for this man, George Darcy. Have you any idea where he lives?
No, Mr. Keen, I haven't.
What does he look like?
He's tall and dark, about 30 years of age. He doesn't look like a gunman at all.
Telephone that description into the police, Mike.
Right, boss.
Meanwhile, Miss Bentley can tell me what she knows about Karl Rollins. You know, the more this murder case progresses, the more convinced I am that the final picture may be an amazing one.
In just a moment, we'll return to Mr. Keen and the case of murder and the jewel thief. Meanwhile...
From February 9th, 1950, Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons. The conclusion comes up next on this Wednesday edition of Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. You know, I've told y'all how much my feet hurt from time to time, and I've also told you how much I enjoy getting to work because right here under my desk I have a pair of my slippers. Mike Lindell's new invention with patented fill, the My Pillow fill that, he works in the pillow so well, comfort memory foam, patented impact gel, and it has an indoor-outdoor sole for all-day use. Right now, they are on sale. If you go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, you will see My Pillow slippers at 50% off, but only for a limited time. Plus, you'll get Mike's softcover book, What Are the Odds? From Crack Addict to CEO. Go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, use my promo code USA, or call 1-800-951-8175. Use my promo code USA. Savings on overstock items too at mypillow.com. Get your beep bop biddly dop boop ready, as we will have on Thursday's Classic Radio Theater an episode of The Danny Kaye Show. Harry James and Kitty Callan join Danny in a play about Cupid As you know, Valentine's Day is just 5 days away, and this was his Valentine's show. So we will hear that on Thursday's Classic Radio Theater. But right now, the conclusion of Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons, and the Case of Murder and the Jewel Thief, as it was broadcast February 9th, 1950, 72 years ago today.
Now back to Mr. Keen and the Case of Murder and the Jewel Thief. Mr. Keen, the famous investigator, and his partner Mike Clancy are investigating the murder of Karl Rollins, alias Kansas Karl, a famous jewel thief who preyed mostly on those in the social register. During the investigation, Mr. Keen and Mike rescued a woman named Grace Bentley, a friend of Karl Rollins, who was being held up by a gunman in her modest apartment. The gunman, George Darcy, escaped. But the story Grace Bentley has to tell appears to Mr. Keen to be very important in regard to solving the murder. And as Mr. Keen listens closely...
I first met Karl Rollins about a year ago, Mr. Keen. I was taking in washing then and did sewing on the side. That's the way I've been supporting myself.
Did you do some work for Rollins, Miss Bentley?
Yes. And he was a charming man. Oh, much younger than I, of course. And I felt more like a mother to him than anything else.
You didn't know then that he was actually Kansas Karl, the notorious society jewel thief?
No, sir. I found that out a few months later. But after I'd gotten to know him well, I realized that there was something fine and decent in Karl that may have been twisted when he was young. So I decided to try to do something about it.
What did you do, Miss Bentley?
I reformed him. I gave him something more important to live for than money and jewels. In the last few months, Mr. Keen, Karl Rollins had changed completely. He was a different man, even a religious man. Oh, I was very proud.
What about George Darcy? What did he have to do with Rollins?
Darcy was one of Karl's old cronies. They'd often worked together in jewel robberies. When Darcy came here and held me up, maybe he wanted to get even. You see, I was the one who made Karl break off his partnership in crime with Darcy.
I just called the police, Mr. Keen, and gave them a description of Darcy. Tall, dark, and around 30.
That was the description you gave my partner, Mike Clancy, wasn't it, Miss Bentley?
Yes, Mr. Keen.
Tell me, Miss Bentley, do you think George Darcy may have been involved in Karl Rollins' murder?
I don't know.
Have you ever met Karl's fiancée, Andrea Mitchell?
No, but Karl told me about her. I understand that she's a wonderful woman. And I was glad when he said he was going to marry her. I was glad that there'd be someone else who'd keep him on the right path.
You must have been very fond of Karl Rollins to worry about him that way.
He reminded me of my brother, John. He took up a life of crime and died while trying to resist the police. I thought I'd be doing John's memory a service by helping Karl.
I see. Is there anything else you can add that might help us in any way, Miss Bentley?
No, Mr. Keen. In spite of his past, Karl had turned out to be a very fine man. When he called you, I think he was giving himself up.
That's what I imagined myself.
Maybe he thought you'd be able to help him by acting as a go-between with the police.
Well, Mike, I guess Miss Bentley has told us everything. I'm going down to police headquarters now to see if I can identify George Darcy in the Rogues Gallery.
You want me to go with you, boss?
No, Mike. Darcy's still on the loose, and he's dangerous. I was thinking of Andrea Mitchell, Karl Rollins' fiancée. Darcy might try to strike at her in some way. Suppose you go over to her home, Mike. And I'll join you there in an hour or two.
Okay, Mr. Keen.
George Darcy undoubtedly holds the key to Karl Rollins' murder. When we finally get our hands on him, he'll have a great deal to answer for.
Will you have another cup of coffee, Mr. Clancy?
No, thanks, Mrs. Mitchell. Do you mind if I smoke, ma'am?
Please do. I'm very grateful to Mr. Keen for sending you over to my home. Even though I never met this man, George Darcy, he worries me after what you've told me about him.
Well, Mr. Keen himself will be here any minute now. Sure, and is that a picture of your daughter, ma'am?
Yes, that's Jean. She's 17. That picture was taken just before her father died.
Aye, she's a fine-looking girl.
Oh, someone's at the door. It must be Mr. Keene.
Just a second, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Keene wouldn't try to come in without ringing first, unless it was an emergency.
There's the doorbell now.
Well, I'll go out, get out of sight behind them drapes there, just to be on the safe side.
Oh, Mr. Clancy, you think it may be...
Just answer the door, Mrs. Mitchell, like you were here alone. Let me do the rest.
One scream and I'll shoot, lady. Get inside. Okay. Where is it?
Where's what?
The loot. And don't fool with me. I want it all.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You and Kansas Karl were going to be married. He must have told you what he did with the stuff. Who did he give it to? Where is it?
Stand still, mister. Don't raise that gun or I'll pull this trigger. Drop it. Drop your artillery on the floor. Now just put your hands behind your back. I'd slip a nice pair of shiny handcuffs on them. There, I guess that'll hold you for a while, mister. That's probably the boss right now, Mrs. Mitchell. Will you let him in, ma'am?
Oh, yes, Mr. Clancy. Mr. Keene.
Mrs. Mitchell, I see you have a visitor.
Mr. Keene, this man just came in and held me up. If your partner, Mr. Clancy, hadn't been here...
I had to put the handcuffs on him, boss.
I saw this man going to the house ahead of me, Mike, with his gun drawn. I thought I'd cover him from behind, knowing you were here to protect Mrs. Mitchell. What's your name?
Darcy.
Sure, and this is George Darcy, the fellow we've been looking for, Mr. Keene.
So it appears, Mike. What are you doing here, Darcy?
Ask her.
What? I don't know what he means.
No? Take a look at that pin she's wearing, Keene.
What about it?
It was stolen 8 months ago, along with $100,000 worth of jewels.
I never knew this pin was stolen. It isn't very valuable.
Afraid not. But the rest of that stuff was worth a fortune. And you know where it is.
This pin was given to me by Karl Rollins. I never dreamed it was stolen.
I'm afraid it could make you an accessory, Mrs. Mitchell. However, by accusing you, George Darcy has opened himself to suspicion of murder.
What?
Darcy, you thought Mrs. Mitchell was hoarding some of your ex-partner Karl Rollins' stolen loot. But you wouldn't have dared to come here to get it if you weren't sure Rollins was dead.
Well,
I want the truth, Darcy. Remember, your own life hangs in the balance, too.
I didn't kill Karl. I knew he was dead because I found his body in his room.
You were in his apartment today.
Karl was going to turn himself into the police. He was giving up $500,000 worth of jewelry. Part of that haul was mine, and I wanted to get hold of it.
You came here thinking Mrs. Mitchell knew where those stolen jewels were.
She was going to marry Karl, wasn't she?
Were you the man who also held up Grace Bentley a few hours ago and tied her to a chair?
She told you it was me?
Yes, she said you were angry at her because she broke up your criminal partnership with Karl Rollins.
I'm not sore at anyone, Keene. It was strictly a business proposition. I wanted my split of those jewels before Karl turned them in to the police.
All right, Mike. We'll take this man, Darcy, down to headquarters.
You're arresting me for murder?
No, Darcy. I'm turning you in for attempted robbery. But I'm fairly certain I'll also turn in Karl Rollins' murderer within an hour. Lock on that door is still broken, Mike. Open it without knocking.
Okay, Mr. Keene, sir. Wait, the place is pitch dark, boss.
There's a light under that door over there. Open the door. It's probably the bedroom.
Oh, Mr. Keene, why, what are you doing here?
Are you going somewhere, Miss Bentley? I see you're packing a bag.
I was going to Philadelphia to see my sister.
Your sister? Is she as much a figment of your clever imagination as your brother was?
What do you mean?
Mike, take a look in that suitcase.
Okay, boss.
Keep away from my things.
One side, lady.
So you reformed Karl Rollins, Miss Bentley. You also murdered him.
Why, you can't prove that.
Oh, no? Just take a look at this, Mr. Keene. There's a false bottom in this suitcase.
Why, you...
Saints preserve us. There must be a fortune in jewelry here.
Yes, Mike. Bracelets, rings, and necklaces that Karl Rollins had stolen over the years, which he was going to return to the police when Grace Bentley shot him down. Her reforming Rollins was only a device, an excuse to gain his confidence so she could get hold of those stolen gems herself.
I've got to hand it to you, Keene. I never thought you suspected me.
Would you like to know how you gave yourself away, Grace Bentley?
Yes. How?
You described George Darcy as being tall, dark, and about 30 years of age. He happens to be short, bald, and at least 40. You gave a false description because you didn't want me to catch him. You were afraid he confessed that he suspected you of having Karl Rollins stolen jewels.
All right, it's your deal, Keene. But I'll make you a proposition. I can get rid of that jewelry and collect $500,000 in cash for it. I'll split with you 50-50 if you let me go free.
That's quite a proposition. You must have some very good connections in the underworld.
I ought to. I spent plenty of time up the river.
And you're actually a professional jewel thief with a record, as I suspect.
Look, Keene, you're making a deal, or aren't you?
I'm not, but you are, with the district attorney.
I'll kill you.
You're not so fast.
Let me go. Let me go before I...
Nathan, she's as strong as a man, boss. If she wants to do a little wrestling, she can wrestle with these handcuffs.
The handcuffs will hold her, Mike, until we replace them with iron bars. Miss Bentley did a good job of reforming Karl Rollins. But I think his love for Andrea Mitchell had more to do with his decision to turn over a new leaf. But as far as I can see, there's only one reform for you, Grace Bentley, and that's the death sentence.
And so Mr. Keene finds the solution to the case of murder and the jewel thief. Friends, you all know history proves that our American economic system has brought more material means for happiness for more people than any other in the world, and without loss of basic freedoms. To better understand your American economic system, write today for the free booklet entitled The Miracle of America. Box 10, Times Square Station, New York City. That's Box 10, Times Square Station, New York. You'll be proud to own The Miracle of America. Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons, is based on the novel Mr. Keene. The radio sequel is originated and produced by Frank and Ann Hummert. Dialogue by Lawrence Clee. Bennett Kilpack plays Mr. Keene. It is on the air every Thursday at this time. Don't miss Mr. Keene next Thursday when the kindly old Tracer turns to the concrete cellar murder case.
There you have it from 72 years ago today, February 9th, 1950. Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons, right here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Visit my webpage, classicradio.stream. There you can stream our shows on demand. You can learn more about classic radio collecting. You can get all of our social media contacts. And you can also send me a note there at classicradio.stream. Don't forget that our shows are always available through podcasts, and you can find the links to all of that at classicradio.stream as well, or just search for Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. That's Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Have yourself a great day, won't you? Please thank this radio station. We appreciate them so much. Support their advertisers. We appreciate them too. And tell all your friends the great radio shows are right here at this spot on the dial. Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite radio station.